Hey, welcome back. My name is Deborah Peters, and this is the Deborah Peters Show. It is an absolute pleasure to have you join me rolling up to the holidays, and a big shout out to all of my followers on LinkedIn that tune in live every Tuesday when we do the show. Really, really appreciate it. Haven't had a chance to respond to you, to all of you yet, but know that I appreciate the comments and the encouragement. So I hope you're going to enjoy today's show. It falls right in line with what this show is all about, which is it's about consciousness. And so what is consciousness? Consciousness is the makeup of who you are. You know, when you're dialed in and connected to your heart, when you are in alignment with your creator, when you are being present in the moment and you're paying attention to how you're showing up and what you're putting across and projecting and what you're receiving back energetically, then I feel like that's really what makes for a quality life, instead of just going through life and thinking that we're a victim and it happens to us and we have no power over our circumstances or the life that we're living. And with that said, I really am passionate about this topic today, about our food supply and especially having access to high quality beef and red meat in our diets, and what's happening with the independent farmers and ranchers across this nation. You know, this is my second episode on this topic, and today I have an Iowa farmer and artist and clearly researcher, because this guy knows exactly what's going on in the industry, and his name is Jim Mundorf. Jim, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know you could probably be working throughout the afternoon, so thanks for taking the time. Now you have a website and a YouTube channel called Lonesome Lands. Is that essentially a playoff of your family farm? Tell us about that operation.
Yep. So I grew up on a farm in southwest Iowa. We're about 50 miles straight east of Omaha, Nebraska, to give you an idea.
Good.
Um, and as far as growing up, we had pigs and cows, and my grandpa raised everything from when it was born to up to when it needed to be butchered. And now we are down to just a cow calf herd, which is mainly cows that we raise their calves up to where they're about 800 pounds, and then we sell them. So.
And are you growing any grain crops?
Oh yeah, we do corn, soybeans. That's really actually probably the main operation of the farm, but like the cattle is what we love doing. So.
Yeah, of course, because there's that interaction. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up pretty much the same. I mean, as a kid, we milked cows and we shipped milk, and we had hogs and we had chickens and then we had a couple hundred head of cows, and we grew all different kinds of grains: wheat, barley, oats. My mom got into flax later on when the price of wheat got really low, but you know, it was just this constant, you're constantly working. Like there's just, you know, I remember as a kid, you know, we'd get so excited to get to go to town, and, you know, because we're pretty isolated in a rural area, and then a cow would, you know, start to calf, and it's like, that's the end, you know, the trip to town is over, right?
Right.
Or you'd be in town and it'd be like Christmas and Santa Claus was coming and we were doing all the festivities, or it would be May Day and the fair would be on, and you know, there was cows to milk, and you just would just like, that was the end of the fun.
Yeah, my Christmas mornings, I remember we all just sitting around because we couldn't go open presents until Dad got in because he was out feeding cattle.
Mm-hmm.
So we all had to wait for that.
I think
he always seemed to take his time too. He never seemed like he was hurry.
He's like,
wow. What's you guys' problem?
Yeah. I work all year to pay for those presents. You can sit and salivate a little longer. It's funny to me when, you know, now I've been living in the city for most of my life, And I would admittedly say I got caught up in city mindset, city attitude. And because, I think as a kid, we just struggled a lot financially, and farming's not for the faint of heart. It's not easy by any means. It's just so much sacrifice and hard work. And, you get a paycheck maybe once or twice a year, depending on what you have for crops. And it could just be all wiped out, So it's a huge sacrifice. And living in this, I just couldn't wait to leave, honestly. And then living in the city, after a period of time, I'm like looking around me going, what am I doing? I'm in an environment that doesn't have any life force. It's all made from concrete. People don't talk to each other. They don't help each other primarily. I mean, not everybody's like that, but then there's this whole thing about your food comes from a supermarket, and food does not come from a supermarket. It comes from the earth, and the stewards of that earth, that crop, is you, the farmer, the rancher, the family farm. You are the people that bring it forward and put it into the supermarket so that we all have something on our plates 3 times a day.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I lived in town for a little while too. And once you get that itch of, you just kind of start realizing what's around you. I mean, for me, I just couldn't get out. It would drive me nuts. Like, I just had to get out.
Sure.
Like, and just get out into some open country. And so that's, yeah, it's in your blood, I think. And I think for a lot of people, it's in them more than they realize. There's there's kind of a yearning for getting out into the open that is in everybody a little bit. So
I think so. And if you've lived it, you can't deny it. Like, it pulls on you. It does on me. I can tell you that going through COVID in downtown Los Angeles, that was the turning point for me. If there was any sort of itch in me to get back out in the countryside and have some open space, being locked down in a high rise in downtown and not even being able to go hiking in the mountains because they were policed, and seeing signs in our elevator to report our neighbors if they had friends over, I'm like, I had this moment where I realized, if anything major goes down here, you'll never get out, Deborah. I said that to myself. You'll never get out because there's too many people for what's available for transportation, and the freeways will be locked, and you just won't be able to move. So, is this really what you want for yourself? I mean, that was probably the biggest blessing for me that came out of that, was just that realization.
Yeah. I mean, COVID was a horrible deal, but I think a lot of good things have come out of it, and mainly that a lot of eyes were opened to how things operate. So
yeah, well, and something I experienced, grocery shopping, which is what inspired me to do this interview with you and some other ranchers around the country. Last month I had Shad Sullivan from Texas on, and I'm talking to a rancher from Montana that we're going to have him on. I want the viewers, especially people that live in the city, that don't have an awareness around where the food really comes from and what it really takes to fill those shelves in the store so that we can eat. And I want to raise an awareness around connecting the dots between the health of your body from the food that you consume to the farmer that plants it, raises it, produces it, and then takes it to market. And that's what I'd like you to shine a light on today, is because since I grew up on a farm, from just chatting with you and doing some research, the whole farming industry and ranching industry has taken a big 180 turn, and it's not for the good. So I wonder if you could kind of unpack some of the changes that have taken place in terms of what it really takes to grow food for humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I started talking about that a little bit, but like what kind of made things clear to me is just looking back, and these changes happen so slow that you don't really realize it. I think there's a lot of people who still work in ag and don't realize how much things have changed. But um, I'll just go into like my most recent YouTube video where I talked about my grandpa. When he got back from World War II, he bought a farm. He grew up on a farm not far from where he had purchased this one. And at that time, when my mom was a kid, he was milking 8 cows a day. They had chickens. They would sell the eggs. They would sell the milk and the cream. He raised pigs from birth up to butcher weight, and then he raised cows from birth to butcher weight. And then, as time goes on, the chicken industry was kind of industrialized before any of the others, and so the chickens were gone, the eggs were gone, and then the hog industry in the 90s, that completely changed. This area in Iowa, there was hogs at about every other farm, and now there's none.
Wow.
They're just all. I mean, there actually I shouldn't say there's none, but there's a few that are still holding out and kind of raising things the right way outside, and they're all with this company called Neiman Ranch, and that's something I need to research more, but apparently they are paying people to raise hogs the way they used to be. But
Wow.
anyway, but yeah, so the hogs went away, and then as far as the cattle, we had raised cattle and fed them up till butcher weight until early 2000s, and then environmental regulations. There was just a lot of different factors that came into how we quit feeding cattle, and I know feedlots and all that becomes a whole different issue, but back then pretty much all cattle were fed in a feedlot. There wasn't a grass finished or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lot of different factors, and one of them was environmental regulations that shut down small feedlots. And everything we were feeding was raised on our place, and that really doesn't happen anymore. People are hauling feed all across the country to go to these massive feedlots because the small,
Crazy.
what they're called is farmer feeders, which are guys that raise the feed and then they fed the cattle, and there's fewer and fewer of them. They're almost gone. And one thing I think kind of you get into that as far as the work I've done, I've done a lot of research. There's one of the major like turning points in the cattle industry was a company called Iowa Beef Packing, and their first plant was not far from here. It was in Denison, Iowa, and they when they opened, the guy said, everything before that was done in the stockyards, which means everybody
Right.
shipped their cattle to one place. For them, their idea was that everyone would ship their cattle to them. And the guy that started IBP said that my stockyards is 100-mile radius around this plant because every farm has cattle at it. And that was, I'm trying to remember, like I think around 1970 or so. But then 2015, that plant had been bought by Tyson Foods, but so it was now a Tyson plant, but they shut it down. And one of the reasons they gave in the press release is that there are no more cattle in this area. And so it just goes to show kind of how things have changed, and where every farm had cattle on it to now they couldn't even find enough. I mean, they couldn't even find enough cattle to keep the plant going. In
Unbelievable.
2015. So
So there's a couple things, and I think we have to kind of dig into this a little bit. So first off is the industrialization of our food supply. I think that to me is a huge problem that shrieks really loudly that we have an issue when we start doing that. Because I mean, growing up, we knew what went into our food supply. What we planted, we had 100% control. Well, until companies came along and had legislation passed that we couldn't plant our own seed anymore. Right? Remember
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah. And now it's suddenly illegal for a farmer to hold back the best of their own seed to plant next year's crop. So guess what? They have to buy the seed. And ironically enough, they have to buy it from the company that got the legislation. And to even, make matters worse, it's GMO tainted seed. It's like there's no quality control anymore. So, I can see like there's this, like you said, it's a slow process that over time that you don't even realize where it's going until after it hits a certain tipping point where it's gone so far south. No offense to being in the South, but still it's gone so far south that we have people that are ill and obese and can't afford food. I mean, it's absurd how far this has gone. So first of all is the industrialization of the food. And then secondly is what? Why isn't there any cattle in that area? Can they not afford it to raise cattle? Well, like what's up? Are they not allowed to? What's the blocker?
Yeah, it is. Well, I can just go into, I talked to my dad right before I did that YouTube video, and he talked about how it was really a combination of a lot of things. But it's always, if there's money there, people are going to do it. If they can make decent money and make it worth their time, people are going to do it. And so what you saw in the early 2000s was there was a lot of people, like we had around 300 head of cattle at our place there. And, there was an environmental thing that, new regulations passed that where if you had over 300 head, you had to do a whole bunch of different stuff as far as containing the manure and just different regulations. And so we saw that, and a lot of guys, there was a lot of lots that had or farms that would have anywhere from 100 up to 500 head. And so when that happened, in order to comply with those regulations, well, you needed to have more to make it worth your time. So a lot of those cattle that were on 100 to 300 head farms, they just quit feeding. And then to make it worth their time, like if we wanted to keep doing it, we would have needed to expand to where we could do 2,000 to 3,000 head at a time
to make it profitable.
So what's that?
To make it profitable.
Right. Yeah. Because you have to, absorb those costs, and that cuts into each head. And so, yeah. So what happened around here was all those small feeders quit farming, and a few of them expanded to the point where they can still do it and keep up with the regulations. And that expansion was, there's not a lot, but there's a handful of 2,500 to 5,000 head feed yards around here, and then you get over into Nebraska and further west, and then you're getting into the tens of thousands of head of cattle.
And so it would seem to me that the industrialization process has profits for those in charge of the industrialization, and that the regulations are probably by the one and the same people. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, back then it was the EPA, but and there wasn't near I get into the hog industry, and it's like that thing just quit overnight, pretty much in 1998. The hogs, they went from being worth about $250 a head to about $20 a head, which, it didn't cover the feed, didn't cover the cost to get them to town. The industry just ended pretty much as we knew it. No small farmer could afford to keep hogs anymore.
Unbelievable.
And so that all went to these large confinement buildings. And yeah, I mean, that was the way to do it. And, hogs are a different animal.
Hold on a second. Confinement buildings. So what you're saying to me is they went from living outdoors in the sun, fresh air, to being confined in buildings?
Yeah. So, and I'm not in the hog industry, but I've talked to guys who are, and what I've heard, as I've looked into it, because the hog thing fascinates me because the
Yeah,
market crashed and they all went out of business. So it's kind of, as I'm looking at the cattle deal, it's like, can this happen? But it's a lot different because hogs will have 6 to 8 babies at a time,
sure.
and they'll do it twice a year, where a cow is having one
One a year
once
or
a year.
two at if they're lucky to have twins. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it makes a big difference. And what the hog people would say is the industry became so efficient with these buildings, because the buildings were being built around the time that the market crashed, that the industry became so efficient that it became oversupplied, and that's why the hog price crashed. But the interesting thing to me is the year before that, they reduced capacity in the packing plants, so they couldn't butcher as many hogs, and they also the pork price never crashed. So in a competitive market, you would think,
Mm,
okay, we can buy hogs at $20 a piece now, and then there would be a competition with the pricing, with the retail
yeah.
pricing, but there wasn't.
So
And
you're
all
still
and
paying like
packers made more money than they ever had before on hogs during that time.
so 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 you're still paying like I think what did I pay the other day? I buy the healthiest bacon I can, that doesn't have any sugar added and no antibiotics and all that. And man, I think that was like $7 or $8 a package or $9 for a
Yeah,
package, which a year and a half ago was like $4.99.
yeah.
And
Yes, I don't know. I know that, yeah, the high end bacon is $8 to $10. And I don't remember what it used to be, but yeah, it's
and now
there
I'm even wondering if I should eat it because look, if an animals aren't that much different from people. We need sunshine, fresh air, and exercise. And that, we're like flowers. We don't get sunshine, fresh air, and I don't think a flower needs exercise, but you know what I'm saying. If we don't
right.
have those fundamentals, we die. We become unhealthy and we die. Our immune systems die. And it's got to be the same for an animal to be inside a building 24/7. Like, I don't want to eat that meat.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say not to eat it, but it's not unhealthy.
How
Um,
come wait, I'm going to challenge you. How could it not be unhealthy? There's no sun. The
yeah, I
sun
guess. I
is
mean, I'm not the
vitamin
expert there.
D. Well, I mean, but you don't have to be, Jim. It's like the sun is vitamin D.
Right.
It builds
But
our
I mean,
immune
what are you
system.
going to replace it with, too? I mean, beef, I guess, is what you should replace it with. They are
Mhm.
mostly all outside. Um, and the quality from the people I've talked to who said now, I talked to a guy who raised hogs during the crash, and he said he talked about how hogs before that time, before they all became confined and raised in these buildings, were the quality was just way higher as far as taste and
Had to
everything.
be. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
look at
And
our
you talk
eggs,
about
right?
how healthy they are. I mean, you have to, you can't wear shoes from the outside into a hog building. You can't wear your clothes from outside into a hog building because they have such disease problems.
Well, gee, I wonder why they're not getting any sunlight.
Right. Yeah. I
There,
mean,
there's
yeah.
no immune strength, so they're compromised.
Hmm. And it's an issue that I think agriculture needs to kind of come to terms with, because for so long, it's the animal rights people who've been bashing, how we
Yeah,
do things. But I think you also need to look at how you do things. And so it's kind of it's what I'm dealing with right now. I don't want to bash people who are raising hogs and doing the work, and I don't want to bash the hog industry, but I also don't like the way it's run. I don't like
of
the way the
course.
hogs are confined in a building 24/7, temperature controlled. I feel like, we should go back to the old, where at least like when, we had a hog building at my grandpa's, and the when the sows would have their babies, they would have them in that building in what they called farrowing crates, which are now
Sure.
thought of as these horrible things. But my grandpa would let them all out during the day, and they'd go all eat on what we called a
Yeah.
feed floor, and then he would open the door for them to go back in. And this was always interesting because they would know exactly where to go. Each
Mm-hmm.
one would go right to its pen where its babies were and climb in, and the babies would feed off of it. And the reason the crates work is because the hogs a lot of times, will lay on a baby,
Yeah, they
on a
will.
piglet, and kill, and it'll end up dying. And so it worked good there for nursing the piglets. And as far as the young pigs, they were in the building all the time as babies, but when they hit a certain age, then they get turned out too, and then they're just outside. They were just outside all the time.
Well, and their mothers were outside getting sunlight and fresh air, and that comes through the milk.
Yeah.
So they were getting the vitamins through the mother's milk because the mother was getting the vitamins from being outside.
Right.
So I don't, it's interesting when we talk about animal rights. Growing up on a farm, I can honestly say that our lives revolved around the welfare of our animals.
Right.
Like the small description I gave you about if you were in town, you could be having the time of your life, and it's like, time to go. We gotta, it's a 45-minute drive back, and we've got cows to milk or whatever the situation was, and that was our lifestyle that dictated how we spent our time. It's like I said, it's a sacrifice. So when you have, in my opinion, when you have animal abuse, it's going to come from these factory corporate operations where there's no emotional connection between the owners of those large operations and the animal. And you're paying hired help to come in an hourly wage to do a job. Maybe they have a relationship with some of those animals, maybe they don't. We really don't know. But when you have an independent farmer or rancher, those animals are their lives.
Right.
And there's a deep emotional connection, even though those animals might go to market and go to slaughter at a certain time in the year. There's still a tug on your heart. Like I remember when we used to have the semi trucks roll in to pick up our yearlings to take them off to market. Like there was always a tear in our eye because we babied those animals before to maximize their growth, just because that was our paycheck,
Yeah.
and off they go. And you always felt sad letting them go because you were connected. There's a spiritual connection, I believe, between animals and humans, even in a farming or ranching operations, especially because there's like an understood relationship dynamic that, and I feel that the animal, understands the sacrifice. They understand the surrender to that, and it's a very spiritual. I mean, if you look back at Native American Indians and their understanding of how the animal spirit sacrifices themselves for the tribe to be able to eat. I mean, I'm talking about some deep stuff here, but if you grow up in a city and you've never been on a ranch or a farm, you just don't know this stuff. You just have no comprehension of it. And it's not an insult to being a city person, but if you grow up your whole life and you think that food comes from a cooler in a store, you're missing the boat.
Yeah. And going back to, it's something that I've thought a lot about is how we're now able to, like, I'm able to sit here and talk to you over the internet and tell my story, and when the hog market crashed, I think about that a lot. Those guys had no way of telling their story. There was no
Yeah.
Facebook, Twitter, any of that kind of stuff. And so now we are living in this era where the story's getting out there, thanks to people like you, and that people are concerned. And if you do live in a city, unlike in the 90s or the 80s or anything time before, unless you went out to a farm, you really never saw it. But now you can go right onto YouTube and see exactly how things are getting done, and it's a big. I think it's a big help, but it also shows a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. So
But we need to know these things. I mean,
yeah, and that's the thing too. Like when the hog market, they
I had
crashed,
no
there
idea.
was nobody that really even knew. Like, yeah, if you lived in town, the pork prices stayed the same, and it was just being the industry was just changing how they did things.
Yeah, I mean, until I
And you
did
can,
the pre-interview with you, I had no idea.
yeah,
And it's really made me, question now. I mean, bacon's probably my favorite. And it's made me question whether I should even buy any.
well, I
It
think,
really
yeah,
does.
I mean, if it's your, and that's the thing, like it's definitely better than anything that's not a meat item, I would say.
Oh,
I think that
yeah,
that is really another thing that's starting to come out too, is how these processed foods have been pushed so hard, no matter what they are. You know, bacon from an animal that isn't raised quite the way you agree with is still better than, a bowl of anything as far as, Fruit Loops or that kind of stuff.
yes, 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 100%. Well,
Um,
on that note, um, couple things I want to say about that is first of all, um, this past year I had some health challenges that were pretty significant, and I haven't really talked about it on air yet. I'm writing a book about it. I had actually just got offered a publishing deal, so kind of like playing with this whole story and where to take it. But I mean, it's immense, and I basically wasn't really given much of a choice by the medical professionals. They were talking surgery and lots of drugs, and I felt in my heart that that wasn't the answer, and that I could find another way. So I just really started researching it, and I went full on keto, like full on healthy keto, um, and intermittent fasting. And the only thing I've put in my body since the early part of August has been beef and cruciferous vegetables. And I cut out, now I've added in occasionally some Melba toast, occasionally just put and some eggs, somewhere to put my poached egg. But as far as like any processed anything, and it's like I was never ill. Like within
yeah, that's
6 weeks, it was like I was never ill.
yeah, and more and more of that stuff is coming around. And when I first started hearing about it, are you familiar with Sean Baker?
No.
He's a doctor. He's kind of the one who started the whole carnivore. He was on Joe Rogan podcast and talked about how he ate nothing but meat. He eats 4 pounds of meat a day.
Wow.
Um, and he was an Olympic athlete, but he was a doctor, and he started doing this and really kind of researching and looking into it. And when I first started hearing about it, like all the stuff he talked about, it was like, well, this is too good to be true, like it just cures everything. But then
Does.
as you keep hearing these stories, more and more people that are doing it and, increasing their meat intake and decreasing their carbs and sugars, and they
100%.
all get better. Like I've never seen a story where it's like I increase my meat and now I'm worse, and I feel worse.
Never.
And so, and I actually got to meet him last week, and he was talking about there's a Harvard study coming out that that is kind of showing that it helps. Eating beef can cure diabetes. Like there are people who've had diabetes, they eat nothing, they cut out all the carbs and sugar, and they don't have diabetes anymore. And so
Yeah.
I know it sounds, even when I've started looking into it, I was like, that sounds too easy. But and more and more people like you are coming around, and saying the same thing. And so it's really neat to see, but then it's also kind of scary and disappointing on how misled we've been,
Well, yeah,
through the years.
I think it's really frankly, you talk about this like slow roll of how we are marketed to, and the narrative of messaging that we accept as a norm over time, not realizing how we're being led down this path, this certain direction. And I think, frankly, that there's been a complete agenda against beef. And I look back on it now over decades of time, and I can see it now. You know, they say hindsight is 2020. And what was interesting for me when I was talking with my doctors is like they didn't even bring up my diet. It
Right.
was not even a conversation. And when I was not adhering to their very forceful suggestions, they were pissed.
Yeah,
And
and
why are you mad if there's an alternative?
and that's similar to a lot of the Sean Baker types of stories. He talks about how people's dietitians and doctors tell them they're insane to do this diet, or to increase meat intake, and then they do it anyway, and they come back and they're better, and the doctor will still tell them that they need to quit doing it, even though they're getting better, like they're getting to be more healthy.
Yeah.
And that's, I saw something, somebody said, if your doctor isn't asking you about your diet or your exercise, you just need a new doctor.
You need a new dog because they don't know.
Because
How do you not know?
I mean,
Like,
that is,
how do you not know in 2023 that exercise, being outdoors, being happy has everything to do with how you metabolize your food? Like, are you living under a rock? I don't mean to be sarcastic, but how do you not know? Like, we live in the world of so much information. It's in your face every day. You can't ignore it. You just can't. I think you
yeah.
choose to. I think people choose to ignore it. I know I did. I know I did. I know that there's times when, I would drink alcohol, and I knew that I always was super sick later, and I would drink it anyway. What was I thinking? Like,
Yeah.
how brain dead was I?
Tale as old as time.
Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to say is this, and that is farm to table now is a thing. It's a really sexy thing. And man, when I was a kid, it was a chore. Like, it was my job to go to the garden and get the vegetables for dinner, to, shell the peas or snap the beans or clean and cut the carrots or peel the potatoes. Or if it was wintertime, we had our basement was full of preserves. My grandmother was like, crack the whip every year and got out the big pressure cooker, and we canned hundreds of jars of preserves. So,
Yeah.
it was my job to go into the dark, dirty, cold basement to get the preserves for mealtime in the winter. And now we call it farm to table.
Right.
But that's okay, as long as people understand there's a concept. So I really feel like the answer now is there's a fine line between fighting things that are wrong and having it suck you dry, or turning your attention to what's good and building that up. And I'm not saying that we should let whoever's in charge of all this, like, collapsing of the independent farmer rancher functionality and service. I'm not saying we should ignore them, but I also feel like they're a machine that is funded up the yin yang and has all kinds of lobbying support and massive backing politically. So that feels futile, although it can be done. I know there was a documentary, and I wish I could remember the name of it. It was this Manitoba farmer that took on Monsanto and won. And he literally flew across the world multiple times. They had him right down to the bare bones of like almost having to sell everything just to like put a meal on the table. And he won. So there is like it can be done. So, but I'm not saying you should get wrapped up in that. I really think what we need to do as a society is we need to start looking up our local farmers and ranchers and buying directly from them.
Yeah, that's still a challenge as far as where we have come, where we've gotten to, as far as how we have this whole system of how, and it's been the system for a long time as far as how food gets to the table. And there's good things about it because it's efficient and we can keep costs down. And but you have to find your point of where are we, what do we sacrifice for efficiency? And I think that's a
Right.
question that agriculture as a whole needs to look at. And I don't think it's something that they've really looked at. I don't think, during the 90s when the hog thing was happening, or all these new issues have come across, I don't think it's kind of always just been, well, this is more efficient, let's do this. Let's do things this way. And so I sold beef direct in like 2004, 2005. We were butchering our own cattle and trying to sell them direct, and it is a ton of work.
Yeah.
It was back then, and it still is. And as far as the amount of beef you get, there's reasons why it doesn't. You have to scale to a certain point to make it work, and
Right.
that's just a massive undertaking. And so, yeah, I would say definitely the best thing for anybody is to buy meat locally,
Yes.
beef locally. And like you heard talking about your bacon, I think this Neiman Ranch, and I wish I knew more about them because I'm learning more all the time and more people are telling me about them. But they raise hogs they're all outside. They're like, people talk about free range chickens, but it's kind of the same thing with hogs. But hogs, you have to feed them. They can't just free range and get enough
Right.
food as they need, but
By
they are
foraging.
outside. There's a guy that lives real close to my family's farm, and he has all these little huts out in the field, and his hogs live in those huts, and that's where they have their babies. And
Aw.
and he's one of the bigger Neiman Ranch contractors. So there
I'm
are
gonna have
places
to
like
look into
that.
that too.
But
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, you also have to be, there's this grass-fed craze with cattle, and now, um, you know, a ton of cattle are being imported
I
that with the
know.
grass-fed label on them. So people go to the grocery store, they see grass-fed, and this is an issue I'm really getting into, is labeling and truth in labeling, because
Right.
it is, in agriculture, it goes back to this whole efficiency thing. It's like, where do we draw the line as far as this stuff? And for so long, like you talked about, there's so many lobbyists and that are controlling things, and corporations are controlling things, and people aren't. And so even going back to that Monsanto guy, if things are happening that are wrong, it shouldn't be one guy's, you know it shouldn't be on him to fly all over the world and fight this fight, because we do live in America where the people elected should be more influenced by the people that vote for them than
No.
these corporations. And that's just not how it is. And it's really scary. The more, I feel like back before I started this Lonesome Man stuff and really looking into things, it was definitely ignorance is bliss. I felt way better about things when you
Right.
don't know really what's going on, and then you start looking at these things, and it's like, how is this happening?
Well, that's what I was trying to say earlier when I was like I really feel the demarcation line between, do we fight the takeover of our food supply by the corporation? Do we fight that, or do we find an alternative way of feeding ourselves and we build that, because it can suck the life out of you.
Right. And it could be, kind of a combination. I feel like, these corporations are going to get away with everything they can get away with. That's one thing I've learned. There is
100%.
not, as far as ethics
About the
goes in the
money.
meatpacking industry, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I know, cattle people will tell me you shouldn't say that because that's going to scare consumers and all this other stuff. Well,
but they need to know.
Right. And we have the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, is there to regulate that. And
But
they
they
are
don't.
heavily influenced by these corporations, more heavily influenced by the corporations than they are by the will of the people and what people actually want. And so
It's an issue. It's like, let's talk about eggs for a minute. Grew up having to go to the chicken coop and pick the eggs. Hated it because the chickens used to peck my hands. But
yeah, same thing. I used to get attacked by roosters.
And the roosters used to chase the shit out of me across the yard. But it's like, looking back on it now, I'd do that in a heartbeat, because the eggs you get from the store, I'm even a little jaded, because we've come full circle where it's like free range eggs were the only eggs, to then the eggs became white and bland and tasteless with these shells that would just, like, you could barely take the egg out of the carton and the shell would disintegrate. There was zero nutrients in them. To now we've got this like free range eggs, and now you got to find, you talk about labeling, you have to really understand the difference between cage free and free range, and then some of the egg cartons have, like, this chicken has 150 square yards to roam in, and I'm like, ay, like, I almost, part of me just wants to take a road trip this summer and just drive around to some of these places that have these free range eggs and see if it's true. That's how jaded I've become.
Right. And that's the issue. Like
I don't believe the labeling anymore.
Right. When you can't believe anything, then yeah, I mean, it's one thing I'm kind of working through my head is fraud that I keep going back to. And one of the definitions of fraud is a deception to create value is called the fraud. And so you look at milk, like there's these white substances that are created out of almonds or oats or whatever.
Yes.
And they're allowed to put the word milk on there. And
I used to drink that
imitation milk, or it's not whatever. I mean, it says almond milk, but it still makes someone think that is milk, and it is not milk.
No.
And that is a deception to create value. That word milk creates the value. And so that is pretty much the definition of fraud. And it's the same.
Well, because we were taught through branding, let's call it a branding and marketing exercise, we were taught that dairy was bad for you.
Right. It goes back to that.
Right. And so, and this, to your point about we can do things better, we can do things right in terms of how we raise our food for consumption. But we have to decide, what's the, is it for the money? Are we doing this? Or are we doing it for the nutrient value and the humanity of the animals? That's a values question. What is most important to you? And I coach CEOs, and I can promise you it's going to be the P&L. It's going to be what the board wants to hear in terms of profit margins, bottom and top line. So it's not going to be the nutrition. Show me a company that's, and that I will jump for joy, that says it's about what the people consume. It's always going to be about the profit. So it's a fundamental values question. And this was programmed into us. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but back in the day, do you know who Katie Lang is?
The singer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Katie Lang grew up on a ranching operation near Red Deer, Alberta. Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And right after she hit the big time, she came out with a beef stinks marketing campaign. And that, to me, was the beginning of turning the tide against red meat and against beef and any kind of dairy product.
So she was against beef?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much to the chagrin of her entire community. I mean,
yeah,
that was their little girl that grew up to be famous. And now she's like, beef stinks and it's disgusting and it's polluting. And I mean, it just went on and on and on. And
right.
we've seen like this play off of that. I don't know if there's anything before that, because that's just really what stands out to me. So maybe there was something leading up to that. I don't know. But when
Yeah, there's always been animal rights people, if you look into it, going back 100 years. Like
sure.
John Muir, the famous like conservationist, I think he was a vegetarian because he didn't believe anyone should kill an animal to eat
Well,
it.
then don't eat a plant. I mean, I talk to my plants and they grow like crazy. I would never eat one of my plants because I love my plants. So I know I'm sounding ridiculous right now, but I'm just jumping on the bandwagon. Then don't eat a plant, because plants respond to love too. Just saying.
Yeah. I don't know.
I know. I just had to throw that in there. I think about that all the time. I'm like, I do. I talk to my plants and they, like my orchids, they just flower year round because I love on them, So you can't eat plants either. I don't know what you're going to eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't even go there, because I guess that's what the bugs are about. Oh, we don't want to go there. So, Jim.
Yeah.
What is it that people need to know? What does the consumer need to know right now where they can make better decisions, more informed, better decisions for feeding their families? Ask you the hardest question there is, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to question everything.
I
think that's more and more the answer all the time. I'm thinking back now, and my wife and kids are like, you're mad at everything they tell me. And I go back to this. It was like a meme I saw where the wife tells the husband to go wake up the kids, and then it shows the husband shaking the kids, telling them how the world is against them and don't believe anything, all that. And that's kind of where I'm at. And the easiest way to do that is to buy, locally, but that's not always the answer, and that's not right now that's not a possibility for everybody. And so maybe that's just the question. As far as I would say the less process, as far as eating nutritionally, and if that's the question, the least amount of processing, the better.
Yeah.
And you go back into your, bacon is going to be better than Fruit Loops because that comes, that isn't really processed. It's still an animal that's being butchered, no matter how it's raised, and meat and your whole foods are better. I'm maybe not the best person to talk to about nutrition because most of my life I pretty much ignored it. And so until now, but
well, it doesn't matter when you figure it out. I think the key, that's the key, is like, take the time, have the interest, have the curiosity to figure it out the best you can. And it's a moving target, so you need to constantly be researching. But
right, yeah, and just don't take, and even your doctor. I mean, we were talking about the things that came out of COVID. I think one of the things that came out is a lot of people are questioning how much, what are they being told, and is it really accurate? We've been told so many lies that have been proven to be lies. And so I think it's good that more and more people are questioning the things that are going on and what they're being told as far as what's good for you.
Well, and that's really the whole reason I started this show. And made it be around consciousness, and living life on the leading edge of thought means that you think for yourself, and you question what you're being taught and told, and most importantly, you learn to trust yourself, trust your instinct. And if somebody's telling you, no, this is it, this is the way it has to be, and you're going to die if you don't do it this way, and you're just like, you don't know what you're talking about. If in your heart you hear this little voice that says, there's another way, you have to find that other way. You owe it to yourself to find that other way. And I think for me, that's really what it's about. Growing up as a kid, never had to worry about what was in our food.
Right.
It was just all good.
Yeah.
But food's everything. You don't have your health, you have nothing.
Right. And, you get into looking at how much people spend. I think somebody said people used to spend up to 50% of their paychecks or income on feeding themselves.
Wow.
And now, like I said, like, where's the line that we draw on the efficiency to as far as income? People will say, well, I don't have the money I can't eat steaks every day, even though that's the healthiest thing you can eat.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, well, I mean, we all make sacrifices. Mothers used to stay home all day long too with their kids. And now I heard somebody say, well, I don't have the money to do that. And the other person said, well, you could always sell your house, live in a smaller house. I mean,
well, you could grow a garden. I mean, I live
right.
in a city right now, on the outskirts of a city. I'm kind of out as far as I can get out to still be in for business. That has about 300,000 people, and I walk, between 8 and 10 miles a day just for peace of mind. And it's how I do my creative process around my work. And I can't remember seeing a single garden.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I don't remember going to the grocery store that often.
Right.
I mean, that's a 180. Like, rarely went to the grocery store to absolutely no gardens.
Yeah. I think things are changing though. I mean, I don't want to sound all bummed out about everything. So you're seeing more and more, I think, and more people are getting chickens. I saw something this morning about some guy was talking about if every restaurant had chickens outside the back of it, they could throw all their food scraps out to these chickens and the chickens would give them eggs.
Yeah.
And then I think there is a turn in people. I mean, I think it's going to be a slow process, but I think more and more people are thinking about things differently as far as how to feed themselves. So,
well, I really hope that this podcast today helps people do that, because that's really my agenda, is to get people to think differently, like start to question, like, what could I do differently? I have to admit, on my walks, I do hear the odd rooster crow,
yeah.
So people in my neighborhood have chickens, and of course you've got to be in a neighborhood that zones for that, but do it as much as you can. Grow a vertical garden on your balcony.
Yeah, I don't have chickens right now, but the plan is my daughter wanted ducks terribly, so I built her a duck pen, and now I'm thinking in the springtime I'm going to get some chickens.
Get some chickens. Why not?
So
get the ones with the like, they look like they have fur on their feet, like they've got all the feathers on their toes. I like those. They're cool.
But I did get chased by the rooster as a kid.
Oh, me too. It was torture. Yeah.
That leaves deep scars.
It really does. Psychological messed up. Thank you so much for being here today. Give us your website so people can follow you and jump on your YouTube channel.
Yep. So where I do all this kind of work is lonesomelands.com. And that's it's really a blog, but it's mostly focused on all this kind of stuff because I'm constantly trying to learn more about it. And as I learn more about it, I write about it, and then I'm doing more and more with video now. and it's just Lonesome Lands YouTube channel.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I saw the one you did with the drone footage. Amazing. Brought a tear to my eye. You do good work.
Trying to learn and more about the technology I can use to do that. And so
yeah, no,
it's kind of crazy how it we're able to, back it's talking about things are changing. You used to have a helicopter to get those kind of shots, and now I can, you can spend $1,500 and go out and video all kinds of crazy stuff. So
yeah, really good. Well, keep up the good work, and thank you for your time today.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, go to Lonesome Lands, you guys, and get subscribed to Jim's YouTube channel, and Drover House is where your art is, so they can head over there.
Yes.
But everything's sold out. I don't know. I was looking on there today. I'm like,
yeah, I am. I'm still working through my wait list. I've got a handful of things I might post soon, but I do have a wait list on that.
Well, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
100%.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell button on YouTube, and then what happens is you get notified every time there's a new video from me. I'm on all the major podcast platforms, from Rumble, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, iTunes. The list goes on and on and on. So definitely drop a comment, because that's what really builds the channels. I really appreciate it. And remember, most importantly, stay aligned, stay awake, and stay alert.